The soup kitchen line stretched around the block that Tuesday morning, snaking past closed storefronts and abandoned buildings in a neighborhood that prosperity had forgotten decades ago. Rachel Torres stood with her 2 children pressed against her sides, their breath forming small clouds in the November cold. 9-year-old Miguel clutched his mother's hand with the intensity of someone who understood, even at his age, that letting go meant getting lost. His twin sister Sofia held tight to Rachel's other hand, her small face buried in her mother's worn coat. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The fabric was thin, donated from a church clothing drive 3 winters ago, and did little against the biting wind that cut through the urban canyon of deteriorating buildings. "Mommy, my stomach hurts," Sofia whispered, her voice so quiet Rachel almost didn't hear it over the shuffle of feet and murmured conversations in the line ahead. Rachel's chest tightened. Sofia's stomach hurt because it was empty. They'd eaten. Yesterday split a single burger from the dollar menu and shared an order of fries, but that had been nearly 20 hours ago. Rachel herself hadn't eaten in 2 days, telling the children she'd already had breakfast before they woke up, that she'd grab something at work later. Small lies that kept them from worrying, from understanding just how precarious their situation had become. "I know, baby. We're almost there. Just a little longer." The line moved forward with agonizing slowness. Around them, others waited with the same hollow-eyed exhaustion Rachel saw in her own reflection each morning. Elderly men with weathered faces, young mothers with babies, veterans still wearing fragments of military uniforms, an entire community of people society had rendered invisible, united only by their shared need for a warm meal and the dignity of being seen, if only for a moment. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. She knew without looking it was another creditor. The medical bills from Sofia's emergency room visit last month had been the final domino in a chain of financial disasters that had been toppling for years. First the divorce, then the layoff, then the eviction, each crisis compounding the previous, until they'd spiraled into a reality Rachel wouldn't have believed possible 5 years ago, when she'd been managing a small accounting firm, living in a modest apartment, planning for her children's future with the naive confidence of someone who believed hard work guaranteed security. Now she worked 2 part-time jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves during early morning hours, neither offering benefits or stability, both paying barely above minimum wage. The math was cruel and simple. Even working 16-hour days, she couldn't earn enough to afford rent in this city. They'd been staying in her car for the past 3 weeks, parked in different locations each night to avoid notice, using gym memberships for showers and fast food restaurants for bathroom access. The children thought it was an adventure, a camping trip that would end soon. Rachel let them believe it, because the alternative, explaining that their mother had failed to protect them from homelessness, was unbearable. Next, the volunteer behind the serving table called out, and suddenly, they were at the front of the line. Rachel accepted the tray of food with murmured thanks she could barely voice around the lump in her throat. Hot soup, bread, an apple. Simple fare that felt like a feast. She found an empty table in the corner, where the children could eat without dozens of eyes watching, preserving some semblance of privacy in this most public acknowledgement of their need. Miguel and Sofia attacked their food with the single-minded focus of children who'd been hungry too long. Rachel broke her bread into small pieces, making it last, watching them eat while her own appetite warred with her maternal instinct to save more for them, just in case. "Mrs. Torres?" A woman's voice, cultured and slightly uncertain, came from beside their table. Rachel looked up to find a woman in her 60s standing with a leather briefcase and an expression of professional compassion. She wore a tailored coat that probably cost more than Rachel had earned in the past 3 months. Her silver hair perfectly styled, her presence utterly incongruous in this place of desperate need. "Yes?" Rachel's voice was guarded. Social workers had visited before, asking questions about the children's welfare, making Rachel terrified that her circumstances might be deemed neglectful, that Miguel and Sofia might be taken from her because she couldn't provide what they needed. "My name is Catherine Whitmore. I'm an estate attorney. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks." The woman glanced at the children, then back at Rachel. "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" Rachel's first instinct was to refuse. Nothing good came from lawyers, not in her experience. But something in the woman's eyes, a gentle urgency, made her hesitate. "Miguel, Sofia, stay right here and finish eating. I'll be just over there." She pointed to a spot 10 feet away, still within line of sight. "Don't move." They nodded, already returning their attention to their food. Rachel walked to the designated spot with Catherine Whitmore, her body tense with the anticipation of bad news. More debt, some legal complication from the divorce, another bill she couldn't pay. "Mrs. Torres, I've been retained to locate you regarding the estate of Isabella Mendoza. I understand she was your great-aunt." The name hit Rachel like a physical blow. Aunt Isabella, her grandmother's sister, a woman Rachel had met exactly 3 times in her entire life, the last when Rachel was maybe 7 years old. A stern, elegant woman who'd lived in the mountains somewhere, isolated from the family by choice and mutual discomfort. Rachel's mother had always spoken of Isabella with a mixture of respect and resentment, calling her cold, difficult, unwilling to help family when help was needed. "Aunt Isabella died?" Rachel's voice came out smaller than intended. "Yes, peacefully. In her sleep. About 6 weeks ago. She was 89. Catherine reached into her briefcase, extracting a thick envelope. She left a will with very specific instructions. "You've been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate." Rachel stared at the envelope, unable to process the words. Beneficiary. Estate. Terms that belong to a different world, not to someone standing in a soup kitchen with her hungry children. "I don't understand. We weren't close. I barely knew her. Nevertheless, her will is quite clear. You inherit everything: her property, her possessions, and all associated assets." Catherine's expression softened further. "Mrs. Torres, I think we should arrange a time to discuss this more thoroughly. Perhaps somewhere more private. There are significant details that need to be addressed." "How significant?" Rachel heard herself ask, her voice hollow with disbelief. Catherine glanced again at Miguel and Sofia, then met Rachel's eyes with an intensity that made Rachel's heart skip. "Significant enough that your circumstances are about to change fundamentally. But the details are complex, and we need to handle this properly. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow?" Rachel almost laughed. Tomorrow she was supposed to work both jobs 14 hours between them, because missing even one shift meant risking termination. She had maybe $15 to her name, and a car that might not start the next time she turned the key. "I work tomorrow. Both my jobs. I can't." "Mrs. Torres," Catherine interrupted gently, "I think you can afford to miss work tomorrow. Trust me on this. My office is downtown. Here's the address." She pressed a business card into Rachel's hand. Along with something else, Rachel looked down to find 2 crisp $50 bills folded beneath the card. "For a hotel tonight. You and your children. Get some rest. Come to my office at 10 tomorrow morning. Everything will become clear then." Before Rachel could protest or return the money or demand real answers, Catherine Whitmore was walking away, leaving Rachel standing in the soup kitchen with a business card, $100, and questions multiplying faster than she could process them. That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, Rachel and her children slept in a real bed, in a budget hotel room that felt like paradise. The children showered until the hot water ran cold, jumped on the beds with delirious joy, and fell asleep watching cartoons they'd missed during their homeless weeks. Rachel lay awake between them, staring at the ceiling, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that anything good could emerge from the wreckage of their lives. At 9:45 the next morning, If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Rachel stood outside Catherine Whitmore's law office, Miguel and Sofia flanking her. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel and obvious wealth. But Rachel forced herself through the revolving door and into the marble lobby, where everything gleamed with success. She'd once believed she could achieve through education and hard work. The receptionist directed them to the 14th floor. Catherine's office overlooked the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing a view Rachel had only ever seen from the ground, looking up. The lawyer greeted them warmly, offered the children juice and cookies, and gestured for Rachel to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than a month's rent in the apartment they'd lost. "Thank you for coming. I know this must seem surreal given your current situation." Catherine settled behind her desk, professional but kind. "Let me be direct, because I think you need clarity more than careful phrasing. Your great-aunt Isabella was an extraordinarily wealthy woman. She lived simply by choice, not necessity. She left everything to you. How much is everything?" Rachel's voice shook. Catherine slid a document across the desk. Rachel looked down at the number, certain she was misreading it. She counted the zeros once, twice, 3 times. Her vision blurred. That can't be right. $195 million, give or take a few million depending on final valuations. Catherine's voice was steady, anchoring Rachel to reality, even as reality itself seemed to have fractured into impossible fiction. The bulk of it is in a rather unusual form, which we need to discuss. But yes, Mrs. Torres, you've just inherited a fortune. Rachel couldn't breathe. The number was absurd, impossible, meaningless. Yesterday, she'd been calculating whether she could afford to buy her children socks. Today, she was being told she was worth nearly $200 million. Why me? Why not my mother? Or my cousins? Or literally anyone Isabella actually had a relationship with? Catherine opened another folder, extracting a handwritten letter. "She left this for you. Perhaps it explains better than I can." Rachel took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was heavy, expensive, the handwriting precise and elegant. "My dear Rachel, by the time you read this, you'll be wondering why a woman you barely knew has left you everything. The answer is both simple and complex. I watched you from a distance, as I watched all of Rose's descendants. Rose was my sister, your grandmother, and the only person I truly loved in my long life. When she died, I withdrew from the family that had always found me strange and difficult, but I never stopped watching over her bloodline. I saw your mother struggle with addiction. I saw your father leave. I saw you raise yourself while raising your siblings. I saw you put yourself through college while working full-time. I saw you build a life through sheer determination, despite every obstacle. And then I saw that life collapsed through no fault of your own. I saw you lose your job when the company downsized. I saw your ex-husband abandon his responsibilities. I saw you working yourself to exhaustion, trying to provide for Miguel and Sofia. I saw you sleeping in your car while still making sure they got to school, still helping with homework, still being the mother they needed despite having nothing. That's when I knew you were the one. Not my own children, who'd long ago written me off as an embarrassment. Not my nephews and nieces, who visited only when they needed money. You, Rachel, who never asked me for anything, because you never believed anyone would help. The money is yours to do with as you wish. But more than money, I'm giving you property. My mountain lodge, a place I built as a sanctuary from a world I found cruel and disappointing. It's remote, it's unusual, and it's yours completely. Inside you'll find resources beyond what this letter can describe. Use them wisely. Use them to build the life you deserve. The life Miguel and Sofia deserve. And, perhaps, if you're willing, use them to help others who find themselves where you've been. Good people brought low by circumstances beyond their control. I never had the courage to engage with the world that hurt me. I hid instead. But you, Rachel, have shown courage every single day of your life. I'm trusting you'll have the courage to do what I couldn't, to take these resources and make them matter, with hope for your future. Isabella Mendoza. Rachel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Miguel and Sofia pressed close, sensing their mother's emotion without understanding its source. "Where is this property?" Rachel finally asked. Catherine pulled up images on her computer, turning the screen so Rachel could see. "Northern Colorado, about 3 hours from Denver. It's substantial." The photographs showed a sprawling mountain lodge, 3 stories of timber and stone set against pine forests and snow-capped peaks. It looked like something from a magazine, impossibly beautiful, impossibly far from soup kitchen lines and sleeping in cars. The property includes 40 acres of forested land, the main lodge with 12 bedrooms, several outbuildings, and complete privacy. Isabella built it in 1962 and lived there until her death. Catherine hesitated. "There's more, but I think you need to see it in person to understand. The will includes specific instructions that you visit the property as soon as possible, that I accompany you, and that certain discoveries be made in my presence as witness." The phrasing was odd enough to penetrate Rachel's shock. What kind of discoveries? The kind that explain where $195 million came from, and why it's currently stored in a rather unconventional manner. Catherine's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something like excitement. "Mrs. Torres, would you be willing to drive up to the property today? Now? I can arrange everything: transportation, meals, accommodations. You'd need to stay at least 1 night, possibly 2, to properly see everything Isabella wanted you to see." Rachel looked at her children, who were watching this entire surreal conversation with wide eyes. Miguel spoke first, his voice tentative. "Mommy, does this mean we don't have to sleep in the car anymore?" The question broke something in Rachel's chest. She pulled both children close, holding them tight, while Catherine discreetly looked away. "No, baby. We never have to sleep in the car again." 3 hours later, they were driving north through mountains that seemed to rise from the earth like ancient guardians. Catherine had arranged everything: a rental SUV, food for the journey, even new clothes for all 3 of them, purchased in a whirlwind shopping trip that had left Miguel and Sofia giddy with disbelief. Rachel still felt like she was moving through a dream, waiting for the moment she'd wake up back in the soup kitchen line. The GPS directed them off the highway, onto progressively smaller roads, paved, giving way to gravel, civilization receding until they were truly in wilderness. The lodge appeared suddenly around a curve, somehow larger and more imposing than the photographs had suggested, perched on a slight rise, with mountains framing it like a postcard. "That's ours?" Sofia whispered from the back seat. "That's yours," Catherine confirmed, parking the SUV beside the main entrance. The air at this altitude was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Rachel stood looking up at the lodge, trying to reconcile this massive structure with her memories of severe Aunt Isabella, sitting stiffly at family gatherings, saying little, observing everything. Catherine produced an ornate key from her briefcase. "Shall we?" The interior was breathtaking: high ceilings with exposed beams, stone fireplaces large enough to stand in, furniture that managed to be both rustic and expensive. Everything was maintained in perfect condition, despite Isabella's passing weeks earlier, suggesting staff or caretakers who'd kept the place ready. Miguel and Sofia immediately began exploring, with the boundless energy of children in a new space. Catherine let them go, then turned to Rachel with renewed seriousness. "The main lodge is impressive, but it's not why we're here. Isabella's real legacy is elsewhere." She left specific instructions for revealing it. Catherine moved to the massive stone fireplace, dominating the great room. "She said you'd understand once you saw this." The lawyer's hands moved with practiced precision, pressing specific stones in a sequence that must have been documented in Isabella's instructions. Rachel heard a mechanical click, then watched in astonishment as a section of the fireplace swung inward, revealing a steel door behind the stone facade. "What is this?" Rachel breathed. "This is why I needed to be present, as witness, as legal documentation of discovery, and frankly, because I didn't believe it myself until I saw it." Catherine approached the steel door, which had a keypad lock. "The combination is Miguel and Sofia's birthdays. Month, day, year, for both. No spaces." Rachel's hands shook as she entered the numbers. The lock released with a heavy clunk, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Beyond lay a staircase descending into darkness. Except the darkness was immediately banished when motion-activated lights flickered to life, revealing steps leading down into what could only be described as a bunker. "Isabella built this in the 1960 seconds, Catherine explained as they descended. "Initially, as a Cold War shelter, but over the decades, it evolved into something else entirely." At the bottom of the stairs, another door, this one already open, led into a climate-controlled space roughly 40 feet square. And in that space, arranged with meticulous precision, was more gold than Rachel had ever imagined existed outside of Fort Knox. Gold bars stacked in neat rows, gold coins in transparent cases, gold jewelry and artifacts in locked displays. The walls themselves seemed to glow with reflected light, turning the entire space into a treasure vault that belonged in movies, not reality. Rachel's knees buckled. Catherine caught her arm, steadying her. Isabella spent 60 years accumulating this. She was a financial genius, started in the stock market in the 1950 seconds, when women weren't supposed to understand money. Made her first million by 30. Instead of putting it in banks or traditional investments, she converted the bulk of her wealth to physical gold, storing it here where she felt it was truly secure. Rachel couldn't speak, couldn't process. Miguel and Sofia had followed them down, and now stood staring at the gold with the same stunned expression their mother wore. Catherine continued, her voice gentle but firm. "The current value is approximately $195 million, based on recent gold prices. It's all documented, all legitimate. Isabella paid taxes on every acquisition. There's a complete inventory in those files." She gestured to a cabinet along one wall. "This is yours, now, Rachel. Every bar, every coin, every ounce." What am I supposed to do with this?" Rachel's voice came out as a broken whisper. "Whatever you want. It's yours." But Isabella left suggestions, recommendations about how to handle it, how to convert it gradually to more liquid assets, how to protect it, and yourself, from people who'd take advantage if they knew about it. Catherine moved to the filing cabinet, extracting a thick folder. She thought of everything: legal structures, financial advisors she trusted, security protocols. She spent years planning for this moment. Rachel sank down to sit on the floor, her back against one of the gold-stacked pallets. Miguel and Sofia immediately curled up beside her, sensing their mother needed them close. The three of them sat in a fortune beyond comprehension, still dressed in the donated clothes they'd worn to the soup kitchen just yesterday. "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why did she do all this?" Catherine sat down across from them, more documents in her lap. She left a longer letter. "Would you like me to read it?" Rachel nodded, unable to trust her voice. Catherine unfolded pages of Isabella's precise handwriting and began to read. "Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, you're sitting in my vault, surrounded by 60 years of accumulation. You're probably overwhelmed, possibly frightened, certainly confused. Let me try to explain. I was born in 1933, during the Depression. My parents lost everything. I watched my father break under the weight of poverty, watched my mother fade from a vibrant woman to a ghost. I swore I would never be vulnerable that way, never dependent on systems that could fail, institutions that could collapse. people who could disappoint. So, I built wealth. And I built walls. I accumulated money because money meant safety. I converted it to gold because gold was tangible, couldn't be deleted by bank failures or economic crashes. I stored it here because here, I controlled everything. But I also watched. Rachel, I watched my family from my fortress. I saw your grandmother, Rose, struggle after your grandfather left. I saw your mother's addiction destroy her. I saw you, even as a child, carrying responsibilities no child should bear. And I did nothing. I sent occasional money anonymously, because I couldn't bear the thought of engagement, of relationship, of potential hurt. That was my failure. I protected my wealth, but I didn't use it for anything beyond protection. I survived, but I didn't live. I had resources to help but lacked the courage to deploy them meaningfully. You're different, Rachel. You've had nothing, yet you've given everything to your children. You've faced circumstances that would have broken me, yet you kept fighting. You've known suffering I spent my life avoiding. Yet, somehow you haven't become bitter or cruel or selfish. This gold is my apology and my hope. Apology for not helping when I could have. Hope that you'll do what I couldn't use these resources not just to survive, but to live. To build, to help others who need it. I'm not telling you what to do with it. That's for you to decide. But I will tell you what I wish I'd done. I wish I'd used my wealth to make some corner of the world better. I wish I'd reached out to family instead of retreating. I wish I'd understood that security isn't found in gold bars and locked doors, but in connection and purpose. The technical details are in the accompanying documents. How to liquidate gradually, who to trust, how to protect yourself legally and physically. Catherine Whitmore is honest and competent. Trust her guidance. There are financial advisors I've vetted, security consultants I've used, legal structures I've established to help you navigate this transition. But the most important thing I can tell you is this. This gold is not your identity. It's a tool. You survived poverty without losing your humanity. Don't let wealth corrupt what poverty couldn't break. Miguel and Sofia are lucky to have you as their mother. You've shown them resilience and love when you had nothing material to give. Now you can show them something equally important, how to have much while staying true to what matters. I wish I'd known you better, Rachel. I wish I'd had your courage. Use these resources to build the life you deserve, and perhaps to help others build theirs. That would be the best use of my lifetime of accumulation, transformed by your lifetime of character into something that actually matters. With more hope than I usually allow myself, Isabella Mendoza. Catherine's voice faltered slightly on the last words. She folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. The vault was silent, except for the quiet hum of climate control systems, maintaining perfect conditions for gold preservation. Rachel pulled her children closer. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Great-aunt Isabella left us all this because she believed in us, because she saw us trying, even when things were so hard." "Are we rich now, Mummy?" Sofia asked. Rachel looked around the vault at the gold that could buy anything, solve any material problem, transform their lives completely. Then, she looked at her children's faces, still thin from too many hungry days, still carrying the wariness of kids who'd learned not to trust that good things would last. "Yes, baby, we're rich now. But more importantly, we're still us, still a family, still the people we were yesterday, just with different circumstances. The money doesn't change who we are, only what we can do." Miguel, older and more serious than his 9 years, studied his mother carefully. "What are we going to do?" It was the right question. Rachel felt its weight settle over her. Not crushing, but focusing. This wasn't just about no longer being homeless, no longer being hungry. This was about what came next, about how they'd use resources that seemed infinite compared to the scarcity they'd known. "First," Rachel said slowly, feeling her way toward answers, "we're going to take care of ourselves, get healthy, Get stable. Learn to breathe without constantly worrying about the next crisis. That's first. And it's not selfish, it's necessary. She looked up at Catherine, who was watching with professional interest, tempered by genuine emotion. Then we're going to figure out how to help other people who are where we were yesterday. Because I remember everyone in that soup kitchen line. I remember their faces. And if Isabella's money, my money now, can keep even one family from sleeping in their car, from watching their children go hungry, then that's what we're going to do with it. Catherine nodded slowly. Isabella would have approved of that. She would have been proud of you. They spent the next several hours exploring the rest of the property. The lodge, with its 12 bedrooms and multiple living spaces. The guest house that was larger than most family homes. The outbuildings that included a workshop, a greenhouse, and a garage housing 2 vehicles Isabella had maintained, but rarely used. Every space was meticulously maintained. Every system functional. Everything ready for occupancy. As if Isabella had prepared for this moment, even as she'd lived alone for decades. It was simultaneously sad and hopeful, the physical manifestation of a woman who'd protected her resources with desperate intensity, while secretly hoping they'd someday serve a better purpose. That night, Rachel tucked Miguel and Sofia into beds in adjacent rooms of the lodge, real beds with clean sheets and warm blankets, with heating that didn't have to be rationed, with the security of knowing they'd wake up in the same place, that no one would knock on windows and tell them to move along. "Mummy," Sofia said sleepily, "is this really ours? We get to stay?" Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Yes, love. This is really ours. We get to stay as long as we want. Forever? Forever." After the children were asleep, Rachel found Catherine on the lodge's massive deck, looking out at mountains silvered by moonlight. The lawyer had opened a bottle of wine from Isabella's well-stocked cellar, offering Rachel a glass without comment. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, before Catherine spoke. "There will be challenges ahead. People who'll want to know where the money came from. Family members who'll emerge, claiming they should have inherited. Decisions about how to manage wealth this substantial without letting it destroy you. But tonight, I think you should just let yourself feel relief. Let yourself believe the crisis is over." Rachel sipped the wine, which was probably expensive, though she couldn't tell the difference. "I keep expecting to wake up back in my car, to realize this was just a dream I had while trying to stay warm. It's not a dream. It's real. And it's yours. Isabella spent 60 years building this security. Now it's yours to transform into something more than security, into opportunity, into impact, into whatever you decide it should be." "Did you know her well?" Rachel asked. "Isabella? I handled her legal work for the last 20 years. She was exacting, brilliant, and terribly lonely, though she'd never admit it. She used to say she preferred solitude, but I think it was more complicated than that. I think she was afraid of being hurt, of being used, of discovering that the family she'd distanced herself from was as cruel as she feared." Catherine paused. "You proved her wrong, you know. She spent years watching you struggle, waiting to see if hardship would make you hard. When it didn't, when you stayed kind and devoted and decent, despite having every reason not to be, that's when she knew you were the right choice." Rachel absorbed this, understanding Isabella a little better. They'd both built walls. Isabella's made of gold and isolation. Rachel's made of necessity and survival mode. But where Isabella's walls had trapped her, Rachel had never stopped hoping her walls were temporary. "I want to create something," Rachel said suddenly. "Not just a charity or a foundation, those are important, but I want something more direct. I want to buy a building and turn it into transitional housing for families. Real apartments, where kids can do homework and parents can breathe without terror of losing everything. I want to fund job training programs that actually lead to jobs with benefits. I want to make sure no child in our city has to stand in a soup kitchen line because their parent is working 2 jobs and still can't make rent." Catherine turned to face her, expression thoughtful. "That's ambitious. It would require significant resources, professional management, legal structuring to protect both you and the program participants. It would take years to establish properly. I have time now, Rachel said, and resources, and motivation from knowing exactly what people need, because I needed it myself 3 days ago. Then let's start planning tomorrow. But tonight, Rachel Torres, let yourself rest. Let yourself be safe. You've earned it. They stood on the deck under mountain stars, and Rachel let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone clinging to the possibility that things might not get worse, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd been given tools and was ready to build. The next morning brought practicalities. Catherine had arranged for a security consultant to visit a former military contractor who specialized in protecting high-value assets and high-net-worth individuals who preferred privacy to publicity. She'd also scheduled calls with financial advisors to discuss converting portions of the gold to more liquid assets, structuring trusts to protect the children's future, and establishing legal frameworks that would prevent the kind of family conflicts that often followed unexpected inheritances. Miguel and Sofia explored the property with the boundless energy of children discovering a private kingdom. Rachel watched them from the lodge's windows, as Catherine reviewed documents at the massive dining table, documents that needed signatures, decisions, choices that would shape their new reality. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Catherine said, breaking into Rachel's contemplation. Family. Isabella was estranged from most of her relatives, but you're not. Your mother, your siblings, cousins, they'll hear about this inheritance eventually. You need to decide how much to reveal, how to protect yourself from people who might suddenly show interest in reconnecting once they know about the money. Rachel's stomach tightened. She'd been so focused on immediate relief, future possibilities, that she hadn't considered this complication. Her mother, who'd been absent for most of Rachel's childhood, lost in addiction. Her older brother, who'd borrowed money repeatedly and never repaid. Her cousins who'd mocked her life choices, her failed marriage, her low-class job situations. Isabella's files contained detailed information about most of your family members, Catherine continued carefully. She researched them, their financial situations, their history of reliability or lack thereof. She left recommendations about who, if anyone, you might consider trustworthy, and who to keep at arm's length regardless of biological relationship. She researched my family. Rachel felt oddly violated and protected simultaneously. She researched everyone connected to her bloodline. Isabella was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. She wanted you to have information, not instructions. She specifically noted that your decisions about family relationships, these were yours to make, but that you should make them from knowledge rather than obligation or guilt. Catherine produced another folder, this one containing what appeared to be private investigator reports. Rachel's hand hovered over it, not quite ready to read Isabella's assessment of her family's worthiness or lack thereof. You don't have to read it now, Catherine said gently, but you should know it exists. And you should know that Isabella's primary concern was protecting you from people who might exploit your good heart. She saw how you functioned in crisis, always trying to help others, always putting your children first, always sacrificing your own needs. She worried that same impulse might make you vulnerable to manipulation once you had resources. Rachel thought about the soup kitchen line, about the elderly man who'd shared his bread with her children, about the young woman who'd offered to watch Miguel and Sofia while Rachel filled out job applications. People in crisis often showed their best selves, supporting each other through shared understanding of struggle. But she also thought about her brother's last phone call, 3 months ago, asking for money to get back on his feet, the 5th such call in 2 years, each one following the same pattern of promises and disappearance. She thought about her mother's occasional texts, usually around holidays, vague messages about how family should stick together, never mentioning the years of absence or asking about her grandchildren beyond superficial inquiries. I don't want to become Isabella, Rachel said quietly, isolated and suspicious. But I also don't want to be naive. That's wisdom, Catherine approved. Isabella's mistake wasn't protecting herself. It was never learning to distinguish between necessary boundaries and unnecessary isolation. You already understand that distinction better than she ever did. The security consultant arrived before lunch. A woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen, who'd spent 20 years in military intelligence before transitioning to private security. Her assessment of the property was thorough and concerning. You're vulnerable, she said bluntly after her survey. Isabella built excellent physical security for the vault itself, but the property perimeter is basically unmonitored. Anyone could approach unseen. The access road is uncontrolled. The lodge has good locks but no alarm system. And, most importantly, your isolated backup couldn't reach you quickly if something went wrong. Rachel felt her brief sense of security crumbling. What do we need? Layered security. Cameras on the perimeter and access road so you have advance warning of visitors. Monitored alarm system tied to local law enforcement. Safe room in the lodge itself in case of home invasion. Eventually, you might consider on-site security staff. But we can start with technology and protocols. How much will that cost? Sarah smiled slightly. Miss Torres, based on what? Catherine told me about your situation. Cost isn't your concern anymore. Your concern is implementation. Time we're looking at 2 to 3 weeks to install comprehensive systems. I can have a basic setup operational within 48 hours, but full security will take longer. Do it, Rachel decided. All of it. I want my children safe. Miguel and Sofia returned from their explorations as Sarah was leaving, their faces flushed with excitement about a treehouse they'd discovered in the woods and a stream that looked perfect for summer swimming. Their joy was uncomplicated, untouched by the security concerns and financial complexities occupying the adults. Rachel made lunch from Isabella's impressively stocked kitchen, simple sandwiches that nonetheless felt luxurious compared to their recent meals. As they ate, Catherine reviewed the immediate action plan, establishing bank accounts to handle the liquid assets Isabella had kept in conventional investments, filing the paperwork, to transfer titles and deeds, scheduling meetings with financial advisors to begin the gold conversion process, and perhaps most importantly, ensuring that news of the inheritance stayed as private as possible until proper protections were in place. The will was probated quietly, Catherine explained. Isabella's instructions specified minimal publicity, but in a world of public records and internet searches, complete privacy is impossible. We're buying time, not permanent anonymity. You need to prepare for eventual public knowledge, how you'll respond, what you'll reveal, what boundaries you'll maintain. Rachel found herself thinking about the soup kitchen volunteer who'd served their meal 2 days ago, about the social worker who'd interviewed her regarding the children's welfare, about the landlord who'd evicted them despite knowing they had nowhere to go. Some of those people deserved to know that the family they'd dismissed or pitied had been transformed. Others didn't deserve the satisfaction. I want to stay here, Rachel said suddenly. At least for now. The lodge, I mean. Make it our home rather than just a property I inherited. Is that practical? Catherine and Sarah exchanged glances. It's isolated, Sarah noted. Schools are 40 minutes away, assuming winter roads are passable. Medical care is even further. You'd be very alone here. We've been alone in the city, Rachel countered. Alone in crowds. At least here we'd be alone in beauty, in space, in security. And the children love it already. You can see it in their faces. Catherine nodded slowly. It's your decision. Isabella lived here full-time for 60 years. It's certainly livable if that's what you want. We'd need to establish support systems, reliable vehicle, emergency protocols, regular check-ins, but it's yours to do with as you wish. Then we stay, Rachel decided. At least until we figure out what comes next. The next 3 weeks were transformative. Sarah, Chen's security team installed comprehensive systems that turned the lodge from vulnerable retreat to protected fortress. Miguel and Sofia enrolled in a small mountain school where their previous homelessness remained unknown, where they were simply the new kids who'd moved into the old Mendoza place. Rachel began the complex process of converting gold to more diversified assets, working with financial advisors who treated her with respect despite her obvious lack of experience with wealth management. And slowly, carefully, Rachel began reaching out to the world she'd temporarily left behind. She called the soup kitchen, making an anonymous donation large enough to feed every person who walked through their doors for the next year. She contacted the social worker who'd been assigned to her case, explaining that her circumstances had improved dramatically. Employment secured, stable housing established, children's welfare no longer a concern. She did not contact her mother or brother. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That decision could wait until she'd had time to process everything else. 4 weeks after inheriting, Rachel received an unexpected call. Catherine's number appeared on the new phone. Rachel had purchased one of many small luxuries that still felt surreal after years of making do with broken screens and depleted batteries. "Rachel, we have a situation. Your cousin Marco has been making inquiries about Isabella's estate. He's hired a lawyer who's filed preliminary paperwork, suggesting the will should be contested on grounds that you exerted undue influence over Isabella, despite your documented lack of relationship. It's a fishing expedition. They don't have actual evidence because none exists. But it signals that family members are becoming aware of the inheritance and are preparing to challenge it." Rachel's first reaction was anger, then something colder and more calculating. Marco, who'd laughed at her situation when her marriage fell apart. Marco, who'd told her she should work harder when she'd lost her job. Marco, who'd never once offered help during the past 3 years of crisis. "What do we do?" "We fight. And we win." Isabella's will is ironclad. Her mental competency documented extensively. Your lack of contact with her, a matter of record that actually proves you couldn't have influenced her. But Rachel, this is just the beginning. Once one family member starts, others will follow. You need to prepare for a siege mentality, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because people become amazingly creative when they think money should be theirs. "Then we prepare," Rachel said, feeling something hardening inside her. Not cruelty, but boundaries. Not isolation, but appropriate protection. Isabella spent 60 years building this security. I'm not letting opportunistic relatives tear it down before I can do something meaningful with it. The legal battles that followed were exhausting but ultimately unsuccessful for the challengers. Isabella's documentation was too thorough, her mental competency too well established, Rachel's actual lack of relationship with her too thoroughly proven. Within 3 months, the will's validity was definitively established, leaving Rachel's inheritance secure against further challenges. But the experience taught important lessons. It showed Rachel who in her family viewed her as a person versus who viewed her as a resource. It demonstrated the necessity of boundaries, of documentation, of saying no without guilt or extensive explanation. It proved that Isabella's paranoia, while perhaps excessive in its isolation, was rooted in legitimate understanding of how money transformed relationships. 6 months into their new life, Rachel stood in the same spot where she'd first seen the lodge, but now it felt like home rather than a shocking gift. Miguel and Sofia had grown visibly healthier, their faces fuller, their eyes clearer, their laughter more frequent. They'd made friends at their small school, joined local activities, learned to ski on the mountains that surrounded their property. And Rachel had begun building what she'd promised herself, not just security for her family, but impact for others. She'd established the Isabella Mendoza Foundation, named for the great-aunt who'd provided the means. She'd purchased a building in the city and begun converting it to transitional housing for families experiencing homelessness. She'd created job training programs funded by gold, converted gradually to cash, ensuring sustainable operations rather than one-time handouts. The work was harder than she'd anticipated, requiring skills she had to develop, relationships she had to build, mistakes she had to learn from and correct. But it was meaningful in ways that simple wealth could never be, transforming Isabella's lifetime of accumulation into active impact, using resources not just to survive, but to help others survive and thrive. Catherine visited, quarterly, reviewing legal structures and financial management, ensuring that Rachel's good intentions didn't create legal vulnerabilities or financial risks. Sarah Chen conducted regular security audits, adjusting protocols as needed, maintaining the protection that allowed Rachel to live openly while keeping certain details private. And Isabella's presence remained palpable throughout, in the thoughtful design of the lodge, in the meticulous documentation that had protected Rachel from challenges. In the letter, Rachel read occasionally when she needed reminder of why she'd been chosen. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Rachel gathered Miguel and Sofia on the lodge's deck, the same spot where she'd stood with Catherine that first surreal night. "I want to tell you about your great-aunt Isabella," Rachel began. She was a complicated woman who did something extraordinary. She built security for herself because she'd known poverty and never wanted to be vulnerable again. But then she gave all that security to us, even though she barely knew us, because she saw something in how we handled hardship. "What did she see?" Miguel asked, his 9-year-old face serious with the weight of the question. "She saw that we didn't let being poor make us mean, that we took care of each other even when we had almost nothing, that your mother worked as hard as she could, and you kids were brave and kind even when things were scary." Rachel pulled them close. "That's what wealth should protect, not just bank accounts, but character. The things about us that mattered before we had money should still matter after." "Do you think Great-Aunt Isabella was happy?" Sofia asked. Rachel considered the question carefully. "I think she was safe. I think she was secure. But I don't think she let herself be truly happy, because happiness requires connection. And she was afraid of being hurt. She gave us what she built, so we could do better, so we could be secure and connected, protected and engaged with the world." "Are we doing that?" Miguel asked. "Doing better than she did?" Rachel looked at her children, at the lodge that was now genuinely home, at the mountains that sheltered rather than isolated them, at the foundation work that was transforming her own experience of suffering into other families' experience of support. "I think we're trying," she said. "That's what Great-Aunt Isabella hoped for. Not that we'd be perfect, but that we'd try. That we'd use what she gave us to build something good." The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, that reminded Rachel of how impossible her current life would have seemed just months earlier. They'd gone from homeless to housed, from desperate to secure, from powerless to positioned to help others in crisis. But the core of who they were remained unchanged. Still a mother who'd do anything for her children. Still children who looked out for each other. Still a family bound by love and loyalty that predated any inheritance. Isabella's gold had bought them security, but their own character, tested and proven in poverty, gave them something more valuable: the wisdom to use resources well, the empathy to understand others' struggles, the gratitude that prevented entitlement, the purpose that transformed wealth from possession into tool for meaningful impact. As stars emerged over the mountains, Rachel made a silent promise to the great-aunt she'd barely known, but whose generosity had transformed everything. She promised to protect what had been given, to use it wisely, to help others as Isabella hadn't quite found the courage to do, to build connection where Isabella had built walls. And she promised to teach Miguel and Sofia what Isabella had apparently learned too late: that security matters, but purpose matters more. That wealth can buy comfort, but not character. That the most valuable inheritance isn't gold in a vault, but the strength to stay decent, even when circumstances make decency difficult. The fortune was secure. The family was safe. The impact was beginning. And somewhere, Rachel hoped, Isabella Mendoza was finally at peace. Her lifetime of accumulation transformed at last into something that mattered. Her isolation redeemed by enabling connection. Her fear transcended through someone else's courage to engage with the world she'd spent 60 years protecting herself from. The inheritance was more than gold. It was opportunity to heal, to grow, to help, to build. And Rachel Torres, who'd stood in soup kitchen lines just months earlier, was ready for all of it. 18 months had transformed more than just the Torres family's circumstances. The Isabella Mendoza Foundation had grown from concept to operational reality. Its transitional housing program now serving 43 families across 3 buildings in the city. Each family received not just housing, but comprehensive support, childcare, job training, mental health services, financial literacy, education. Everything Rachel had needed and couldn't find when she'd been sleeping in her car. But success brought visibility. And visibility brought complications Rachel hadn't fully anticipated. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, while Rachel was reviewing applications for the foundation's expansion into a 4th property. Catherine's number flashed on the screen, but the lawyer's tone was tense in a way Rachel had learned to recognize as warning. "We have a problem. A journalist named Marcus Webb from the Denver Post has been investigating the foundation's funding sources. He's filed public records requests, interviewed former family members, and apparently has connected enough dots to start asking very specific questions about Isabella's estate and the nature of her assets." Rachel's stomach clenched. They'd always known complete privacy was impossible, but they'd hoped for more time before facing detailed public scrutiny. What kind of questions? Questions about how a woman who lived modestly accumulated enough wealth to fund your foundation's operations. Questions about unconventional asset storage. Questions about gold. Catherine paused. "He called my office yesterday, asking for comment on what he's calling one of the largest private gold hoards in American history, hidden in the mountains for decades and now funding social programs. Rachel, he knows. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous." The word dangerous hung between them. Rachel had learned over the past year that wealth, especially unusual wealth, with an unconventional history, attracted more than just family challenges. It attracted media attention, regulatory scrutiny, treasure hunters, and opportunists of every variety. "What do we do?" "We have 3 options," Catherine said. 1. We refuse all comment and let him publish whatever he's found, which will be partial information subject to his interpretation. 2. We threaten legal action to suppress the story, which typically backfires by making journalists more determined and making us look like we're hiding something illegal. Or 3. We cooperate selectively, give him access to enough accurate information to write a truthful story, but on our terms with appropriate boundaries around privacy and security. Rachel stood and walked to the lodge's windows, looking out at mountains now familiar as her own reflection. Miguel and Sofia were at school, living normal 10-year-old lives that she'd fought to preserve despite their extraordinary circumstances. This decision would affect that normalcy, potentially exposing them to attention neither they nor Rachel wanted. If we cooperate, can we control what he publishes? Control? No. Influence? Yes. We can provide context, explain Isabella's legitimate acquisition of assets, demonstrate the foundation's genuine impact, and establish a narrative that's compelling and true, rather than sensational and speculative. But Rachel, once this story breaks, your privacy is gone. People will know about the inheritance, they'll know about the gold, and they'll have opinions about what you should do with it. Rachel thought about the soup kitchen volunteers who'd treated her with kindness when she'd had nothing, about the families currently living in foundation housing who'd finally found stability after years of crisis, about Miguel and Sofia, who deserved to grow up without being defined by money they hadn't earned and didn't really understand. Set up a meeting with him, Rachel decided. But here, at the lodge, I want him to see where Isabella lived, understand who she was. If this story is going to be told, it should be told accurately, with her humanity intact and our mission clear. Catherine's approval was audible even through the phone. I'll arrange it. But Rachel, be prepared. Once you open this door, you can't close it again. Your life as a private person managing quiet philanthropy that ends the moment this article publishes. I know, Rachel said quietly. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe it's time to stop hiding what Isabella built and start showing what it can do. Marcus Webb arrived at the lodge 3 days later, a man in his early 40s, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time chasing stories than worrying about presentation. But his eyes were sharp, assessing everything, the lodge's obvious quality, the security systems that were visible once you knew to look for them, the comfortable wealth evident in every detail. Rachel met him on the deck with Catherine present as legal counsel and witness to all conversations. She dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, wanting to appear neither defensive nor ostentatious. Just a woman who'd inherited something extraordinary and was trying to use it well. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Marcus began, pulling out a digital recorder after asking permission. I've been researching Isabella Mendoza for 3 months. She's one of the most fascinating people. I've never heard of a woman who apparently accumulated a fortune while living like a hermit, then left it all to a great niece she barely knew. That's a hell of a story. It is, Rachel agreed. But it's also Isabella's story more than mine. And I think if you're going to write about her, you should understand who she actually was, not just what she accumulated. Over the next 4 hours, Rachel walked Marcus through everything, showing him photographs of Isabella throughout her life, sharing the letters that explained her choices, demonstrating the vault with its remaining gold stores, and explaining the foundation's work in detail. She was honest about Isabella's isolation, her paranoia, her difficulty connecting with people, but she was also clear about Isabella's intelligence, her principles, her ultimate generosity in trusting Rachel with the resources she could have hoarded until death. Marcus asked difficult questions. Why gold instead of conventional investments? How did Rachel justify keeping so much wealth private while people suffered? What gave her the right to decide how Isabella's fortune should be used? Wasn't this just another case of wealthy people playing at charity while maintaining their own comfort? Rachel answered each question directly, without defensiveness. Isabella chose gold because she'd lived through the Depression and never trusted institutions again. I'm converting it gradually to more diversified assets, because that's more practical and responsible. I keep some details private because complete transparency would compromise security and create problems that would distract from the actual work. And as for what gives me the right, Isabella gave me that right. She watched me struggle for years and decided I'd use her resources better than she could. I'm trying to prove her right. She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. As for playing at charity, I lived in my car with my children 18 months ago. I stood in soup kitchen lines. I worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford rent. This isn't theoretical for me. Every family in our housing program, I see myself. Every single parent working 3 jobs, I know exactly what that desperation feels like. So no, I'm not playing. I'm deadly serious. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He'd arrived skeptical, expecting either defensive wealth protection or naive do-gooderism. What he'd found was neither just someone with resources trying to address problems she understood intimately. Can I visit the foundation's properties? He asked. Interview some of the families you're helping. With their permission, yes. But Marcus, they're in crisis. They're rebuilding. I won't let you exploit their vulnerability for a more dramatic story. You can talk to people who volunteer to speak with you, but I'm protecting the ones who need privacy while they heal. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Can I ask one more question? What would you say to people who think this money should have gone to Isabella's children, or that you somehow manipulated an old woman into leaving you a fortune? Rachel smiled without humor. Isabella's children cut her off years ago because they found her embarrassing. They visited when they wanted money and ignored her otherwise. She left them out deliberately because she didn't trust them to use resources responsibly. As for manipulation, I hadn't seen or spoken to Isabella since I was 7 years old. I didn't know she was tracking my life. I didn't know she had wealth to leave. I was completely shocked by the inheritance. The only thing I did to earn it was survive poverty without becoming cruel or bitter. If that's manipulation, I'm guilty. Marcus spent 2 more days researching, visiting the foundation's housing properties, interviewing staff and willing residents, reviewing financial documents. Rachel authorized Catherine to share, and apparently fact-checking every detail of Rachel's account. Rachel waited with growing tension, knowing the story's publication would fundamentally change their lives but unable to predict exactly how. The article appeared on a Sunday morning, front page of the Denver Post, with a headline that made Rachel's breath catch. The Hermit's Fortune. How a reclusive millionaire's hidden gold is fighting homelessness. Rachel read it 3 times, her emotions shifting with each pass. Marcus had been thorough and surprisingly fair. He'd portrayed Isabella as complex rather than simply eccentric, a brilliant woman shaped by Depression-era trauma, whose fear of vulnerability had led to isolation, but whose ultimate generosity had created opportunity for meaningful impact. He'd explained the gold hoard's legitimacy, Isabella's meticulous documentation, the legal challenges Rachel had faced and overcome. Most importantly, he'd focused substantial attention on the foundation's work, profiling 3 families who'd transitioned from homelessness to stability, detailing the comprehensive support programs, and letting the results speak for themselves. The article concluded with a question. In an era when billionaires compete over whose charitable foundation is larger, Rachel Torres represents something different, someone who knows intimately what poverty feels like and is using inherited wealth to address it with unusual effectiveness. The question isn't whether she deserves Isabella Mendoza's fortune. The question is whether she can transform it into lasting impact. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By noon, Rachel's phone was flooded with calls, media requests, donation offers, people asking for help, family members she hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. The foundation's website crashed from traffic. Catherine's office was inundated with inquiries. Miguel and Sofia came home from a friend's house to find their mother sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by her laptop and 3 phones, all ringing simultaneously. "Mom?" Miguel's voice was tentative. "Kids at school were talking about an article. About us. About how we used to be homeless." Rachel's heart sank. This was what she'd feared most: her children's exposure. Their private struggles becoming public knowledge. Their identity shifting from Miguel and Sofia to those kids whose mom inherited millions. She pulled them both close. Yes, a journalist wrote about Great-Aunt Isabella's inheritance and about our family. Some of it might be hard to read because it talks about when things were difficult for us. But it also talks about how we're trying to help other families now. "Are kids going to treat us different?" Sofia asked, and Rachel heard the real question beneath. "Are we still normal?" "Some might," Rachel admitted. "Some people act strange around money. But the people who matter, who are really your friends, they'll still see you, not the inheritance. And if they don't, then they weren't real friends anyway." It was cold comfort, and Rachel knew it. But it was honest, which mattered more than false reassurance. The following weeks tested every system Rachel had built. The foundation's application process was overwhelmed with requests. Media outlets wanted interviews. A documentary crew proposed a multi-part series. 3 different publishers offered book deals. And perhaps most challenging, people she'd known in her previous life began emerging: former co-workers, old acquaintances, distant relatives, all suddenly interested in reconnecting, many with carefully worded requests for loans or investment opportunities. Catherine had warned her about this. People will come out of the woodwork. Some genuinely happy for you, some looking for opportunity, many unable to separate the person from the resources. You'll need to develop filters quickly, or you'll be consumed by requests. Rachel, develop those filters. But each rejection hurt. Each time she said no to someone asking for help, she remembered being the one asking, being the one desperate enough to risk pride for survival. How did you maintain compassion while protecting boundaries? How did you help broadly without enabling specifically? How did you use wealth responsibly without becoming the thing you'd once resented, someone with resources who seemed oblivious to others' suffering? The answer came unexpectedly from the Foundation's earliest success story. Maria Santos had been one of the first families housed, a single mother with 4 children who'd spent 6 months in her minivan before finding the program. She'd worked through job training, secured employment with benefits, saved enough for a deposit, and recently moved into her own apartment, a graduation from transitional housing to independent stability. Maria showed up at Rachel's office unannounced on a Friday afternoon, when Rachel, who was buried in paperwork and media requests and family drama, she couldn't quite escape. "I saw the article," Maria said simply. "Saw you on the news too, getting criticized by some jackass saying you're not doing enough. That you should give away everything immediately. Wanted to tell you something." Rachel gestured for her to continue, too exhausted for social niceties. "Before I found your program, I was dying. Not physically, but inside. You know, working 3 jobs, watching my kids suffer, knowing I couldn't protect them from hunger or cold or fear. Your program didn't just give me housing, it gave me time to breathe, to plan, to become someone other than a crisis waiting to happen." Maria leaned forward, her expression intense. People who've never been desperate, they don't understand that helping isn't just about money, it's about dignity. Your program treats us like people, not charity cases, like we're worth investing in, not just feeding once and forgetting. That's rare. That matters. Don't let people who've never struggled tell you how to help people who are struggling. After Maria left, Rachel sat quietly for a long moment. Then she did something she'd been avoiding. She wrote her own response. Not an interview or statement, but a first-person essay about inheritance, responsibility, and the complexity of trying to help without harm. She wrote about standing in soup kitchen lines and the specific shame of needing charity while working 2 jobs, about the terror of watching your children go hungry because your paycheck wouldn't stretch far enough, about sleeping in cars and using gym memberships for showers, and calculating whether you could afford to buy your daughter socks. And then she wrote about Isabella's gift, not just the money, but the trust, the belief that someone who'd survived poverty without losing compassion might use resources better than someone who'd accumulated them while avoiding relationship. She wrote about the responsibility that came with unexpected wealth, about learning to say no without losing empathy, about building systems that helped without creating dependency. She wrote about Miguel and Sofia, about wanting them to understand that money was tool, not identity, that privilege created obligation, not entitlement, that being comfortable should make you more aware of others' discomfort, not less. The essay went viral in ways the original article hadn't shared across social media, reprinted in newspapers, discussed on talk shows. Rachel became, almost accidentally, a voice in conversations about wealth inequality, about effective philanthropy, about the difference between charity that maintains hierarchies and support that enables genuine change. It was uncomfortable. Rachel had never sought public platform or wanted to be spokesperson for anything, but she'd learned something important. Silence could be comfortable, but it was also a form of abdication. If she had resources and platform and lived experience, staying quiet meant wasting all 3. 6 months after Marcus Webb's article published, Rachel stood before a Senate subcommittee examining housing policy and poverty intervention programs. She'd been invited to testify about the Foundation's model, about what made it effective, about how federal policy might better support families in crisis. She wore a simple suit, professional but not expensive, and carried a folder containing not statistics, but stories. Stories of families the Foundation had served, anonymized but specific. Stories that illustrated what worked and what didn't, what helped and what harmed, what policymakers needed to understand about poverty they'd likely never experienced personally. "The most important thing I can tell you," Rachel said to the assembled senators and their staff, "is that poverty isn't a moral failure. It's a mathematical failure when costs exceed income, regardless of how hard someone works. The families we serve aren't lazy or irresponsible. They're working multiple jobs, making impossible choices between food and medicine, heat and rent. They need systems that make stability achievable, not charity that maintains crisis." She spoke for 20 minutes, answered questions for 40 more, and left knowing that policy wouldn't change overnight, that systems had inertia that resisted even well-intentioned reform. But she'd planted seeds. She'd told truths that needed telling. She'd used her platform for something that mattered. That evening, back at the lodge with Miguel and Sofia doing homework at the kitchen table, Rachel felt something settle inside her. Peace, maybe, or at least acceptance. She'd never asked for Isabella's inheritance, never sought public attention, never wanted to become spokesperson for poverty or wealth, or anything in between. But this was her life now. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd have chosen, but the life she'd been given. And she was finally learning to inhabit it without apology, using resources without guilt, maintaining boundaries without cruelty, helping others without losing herself, and teaching her children that privilege was responsibility, not prize. Isabella had given her more than gold. She'd given her opportunity to transform suffering into purpose, to build something that mattered, to prove that people who've known hardship can use resources without being corrupted by them. The inheritance was secure, the family was thriving, and the work continued. It wasn't perfect. It was never perfect. But it was real, it was honest, and it was making a difference. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.